Wellspring Fire Ministry sat like a crown on the hill, glowing every Sunday with the fire of miracles. People came from across the country, old women with aching bones, desperate mothers with barren wombs, blind men led by hopeful children, and sinners longing for forgiveness. They called it the place where heaven touched earth, where the man of God, Pastor Elijah, commanded sickness to flee and demons to vanish like mist. The crowd overflowed every service. Voices rose like 1,000 trumpets, and drums beat like thunder. You could feel the air tighten the moment Pastor Elijah stepped onto the altar, a tall, commanding figure with a smile that both comforted and terrified. With a simple wave of his hand, people collapsed, screaming or laughing uncontrollably, claiming deliverance. And yet, behind all this wonder, there was something strange. People whispered about how fast his church rose, from a small tent to a marble fortress in less than 2 years. They whispered about how no one had ever seen Pastor Elijah pray in public. Yet his miracles were faster than any other pastor in the region. It was as if power dripped from his fingertips. But no one dared ask questions. Why would they? The blind saw. The lame danced. The barren conceived. What else did they need? Yet there was one who watched differently. A widow named Mama Titi. She was known in the village for her wisdom and her silence. She didn't shout or dance. She sat at the back, eyes sharp, hands always holding her Bible tightly. And every Sunday, she watched Pastor Elijah with a look that said, "There's more here than meets the eye." She saw things others missed, how his eyes sometimes flickered when he closed them to pray, how the walls behind the altar were always tightly sealed, how strange birds circled the church during night vigils. And on this particular Sunday, as the crowd roared and a blind boy screamed, "I can see! I can see!" Mama Titi did not clap. She simply whispered to herself, "God gives gifts, but this one feels borrowed." That evening, the sun had dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of burnt orange and smoky purple. The church compound was silent, save for the occasional rustling of dry leaves and the chirp of restless crickets. Most of the congregation had gone home, exhausted but rejoicing. Miracles had reigned once again. But Mama Titi had forgotten her small raffia basket under the back pew. She returned quietly, her wrapper swishing gently as she climbed the hill road toward the church. She didn't expect anyone to be there. The place should have been empty. But as she approached the doors, she noticed something strange. The front gate was still wide open, and dim candlelight flickered from inside. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially in holy places, but some call it discernment. And tonight, Mama Titi felt something pull her in. She stepped lightly across the tiled floor of the main hall. The benches sat in rows, silent witnesses to what had transpired hours ago. Her basket was exactly where she left it, but just as she bent to pick it up, a sound stopped her cold. A low hum, deep and rhythmic, echoing from behind the altar curtain. It wasn't prayer, not the kind she knew. It was something darker. The tongue was ancient. Syllables formed like drops of oil falling on fire. It sent a chill down her spine. She tiptoed closer, careful not to creak the wooden floorboards. And then, just as she reached the edge of the crimson curtain that draped behind the pulpit, she peeked. What she saw would never leave her mind. Pastor Elijah was on his knees before a strange wooden box, his hands stretched out over it, shaking. His eyes were rolled back into his head. He chanted words that twisted the air, words no normal man should ever utter. The box, covered in a red cloth embroidered with symbols, pulsed softly like it had a life of its own. And then, as if sensing her, Elijah stopped. His head snapped toward the curtain. But Mama Titi had already turned and fled into the night, her basket forgotten once more. That night, as she lay in bed, trembling under her wrapper, she whispered, "Lord, what did I just witness in your house?" But heaven was silent, and outside the wind howled like a warning. The next Sunday arrived like a storm of expectation. Word had spread across villages. Another wave of testimonies was coming. The air was thick with excitement as people squeezed into the church, some hanging by the windows, others sitting on stools brought from home. It was as if all of humanity had gathered to witness the impossible once again. And when Pastor Elijah climbed the altar that morning, he didn't greet the congregation. He simply lifted one hand, and the room fell silent, like something divine had entered the space. Then came the moment. A young woman, Sister Amaka, hobbled up to the stage, the same woman who had been paralyzed for 3 years after a bus accident. Her legs had shriveled, her voice faint, her hope lost long ago. But today she stood, no cane, no help. She walked barefoot across the stage, carrying a baby in her arms. Gasps filled the sanctuary. People cried out. Some dropped to their knees wailing. Others lifted their hands and screamed, "He is God's own! This is the prophet of fire!" The crowd erupted in praise. Shoes were flung in the air, wrappers tied to poles. The drums beat louder than thunder. People wept uncontrollably. But at the far end, behind the last pew, Mama Titi stood still. Her eyes never left the altar. She remembered Sister Amaka clearly. Only 6 months ago, the doctors had said she could never walk again, and certainly not give birth. Even the native healers had surrendered. And yet, here she was, walking, beaming, nursing a child who couldn't be more than 2 months old. Miracle? Maybe, but Mama Titi's mind drifted back to that box behind the curtain. The symbols, the strange chant, and the glowing silence in the room that night. She had seen something beyond understanding. And now, the miracles were too clean, too perfect. No struggle, no tearing, no prayers shouted, just a touch and reality bent. As the crowd surged forward to touch Pastor Elijah's feet, Mama Titi whispered quietly to herself, "Even the devil can perform signs and wonders when it suits him." But no one heard her. They were too busy worshiping, not God, but the man behind the altar. The skies opened that Tuesday evening, as if the heavens themselves had grown heavy with secrets. Rain poured without mercy, washing the red earth roads and drumming endlessly on rooftops. But Mama Titi stood at the gates of Wellspring Fire Ministry, her scarf soaked, eyes fixed on the church doors. She had made up her mind. She waited. Pastor Elijah never left the church without locking the altar room. It was his sanctuary and his secret. And tonight, Mama Titi would look him in the eye. No more hiding, no more whispers. Hours passed. Then he came. A black umbrella shielded him as he stepped out. He looked surprised to see her. His face smiled, but his eyes didn't. He asked nothing. He simply stepped aside as if already knowing what she wanted. The air between them was tense, humming with invisible threads. Thunder cracked above them like judgment. She wanted to speak, to ask what he kept behind the red curtain, what tongue he prayed in when no one listened, what power fueled these perfect miracles. But her words caught in her throat. And then Elijah said something, not loud, not threatening, but enough to turn her blood cold. "Some doors, Mama, once opened, can never be shut again." Then he turned and walked into the night. Mama Titi stood in the rain long after he left, and from the church walls she thought she saw shadows move, not away from the storm, but toward it. 10 years before the altar, Elijah had been a desperate man, hungry, forgotten, cast off by his village after his father died of madness and his mother of grief. He had roamed from city to city, surviving on scraps, preaching to empty streets, ignored by the world. No one listened, no one cared. Until one evening, under a dying mango tree in a forgotten forest path, he met a man with silver eyes. The man wasn't old, he wasn't young, he simply was. He told Elijah, "The world doesn't follow those who speak truth. It follows those who command wonder." Elijah listened. "You want crowds?" the man asked. "You want power? Respect? A name carved in gold?" Elijah nodded. Then the man smiled and opened a wooden box covered in red cloth. "You will lay hands and bones will straighten. You will speak and tumors will vanish. But remember this, every wonder is borrowed, and every borrowed thing must one day be returned." Elijah took the offer. He never asked the cost, and for 10 years he built a church that sparkled like heaven, but stood on foundations rooted in blood and shadows. The miracles multiplied. The church overflowed weekly. Crutches were tossed at the altar like useless sticks. Wheelchairs became ornaments. Women who hadn't bled in years were now naming babies after Elijah, but peace fled him. Every night, Elijah woke in sweat, staring at the corners of his room where the shadows pulsed. Sometimes he saw faces in the mirror, not his own, eyes hollow, skin burned, mouths moving without sound. They were the healed, or perhaps what remained of them. They whispered things that made the air grow cold. One night, a child with hollow eyes stood at his window, whispering, "You healed my body, but took my soul." Elijah screamed, but his scream made no sound, and when he looked again, the window was empty. He locked himself in the church that night and prayed, not to God, but to the box behind the altar. Mama Titi was no prophet, but dreams had followed her since she was a child. That night, her dream was unlike any she had ever seen. She stood in Wellspring Church. The walls were gone. The roof stretched into a sky made of fire. The altar cracked open like a broken tomb, and from it slithered a red serpent with golden eyes. It hissed her name. "You want to save them?" it said, "but they worship me now." Then fire engulfed the pews. Screaming faces melted into ash. And at the center of it all stood Pastor Elijah, arms raised, smiling as wings of shadow grew from his back. She woke with a cry, clutching her Bible to her chest. Sweat poured down her body like rain, and for the first time in her life, she was afraid to pray, because she feared the voice that might answer. The next Sunday, Mama Titi returned to the church with her heart pounding like war drums. She noticed something no one else did. Pastor Elijah preached with fire, quoting scriptures with passion, flipping through the pages of his gold-lined Bible. But when she squinted, the pages were blank, not faded, not worn, blank. No ink, no letters, no verse, and yet he read as if words danced before him. She looked around. No one else noticed. Or maybe they chose not to. At that moment, she knew the power in the church no longer came from heaven, but from something that had rewritten even the holy book for its servant. A young boy was brought to the altar. His mother wailed. The boy had refused to speak or eat for days. His eyes stayed open even in sleep. His body twitched like a string pulled too tight. Pastor Elijah placed his hands on the boy's forehead, as always. The crowd held its breath. But this time the boy did not collapse. Instead, he opened his eyes, glowing red, and began to speak in a voice not his own. "You do not command me, you serve me." The boy laughed, loud, sharp, mocking. The crowd fell silent. Elijah's hand shook, but he recovered quickly, smiled, declared the boy healed. The crowd cheered. But Mama Titi had seen the truth. The mask was slipping, and whatever lived behind the altar was no longer hiding. Mama Titi followed him. It was not by choice, but by something deeper, a pull in her spirit, a burning in her chest that said, "You must see where it begins." One night, when the stars blinked with unease and even the dogs refused to bark, she trailed Pastor Elijah as he left the church alone, dressed in black, his face heavy. He moved like a man burdened or cursed. He walked for miles into the bush. The road vanished. Trees closed in. Thorns scraped her feet. But still, she followed. Then, in a clearing where no bird dared perch, he knelt before a lifeless tree, its bark scorched, its trunk split open like a wound. At its base sat the same box from the altar, now uncovered, glowing faintly red. Elijah laid something beside it, a white goat, trembling. He slit its neck without prayer, without hesitation. The blood soaked into the ground, which hissed like fire doused in oil. Then a voice spoke, not from Elijah's lips, but from the tree itself. "You are weakening," it said. "Your debt is growing. We require more." Elijah bowed lower, whispering something even the air refused to carry. And Mama Titi, hidden in the shadows, covered her mouth and wept. The church was locked the next day, but locked doors never stopped a woman led by conviction. When no one was around, Mama Titi entered through the back, a broken window near the vestry. She moved like smoke, silent and quick. Her hands trembled as she reached the curtain behind the altar, the veil the church never saw behind. She peeled it back. Behind it was a room, cold, damp, and wrong. The floor was painted with strange markings. At the center sat the box. Around it were jars filled with feathers, bones, hair, and dried blood. Animal parts, human trinkets. On the wall hung pictures of the healed, each one marked with red ink over the eyes. At the center of it all, a blackened Bible lay open. Not in English, not in Yoruba, not in any tongue she recognized. Yet somehow it seemed to speak, to breathe. She collapsed to her knees, whispering prayers that cracked with fear. Her chest heaved, her spirit burned. "This is not God's house," she said to herself, and somewhere far off, the church bells rang. But no hand had touched them. That Sunday, only half the usual crowd showed up. Word was spreading, quiet but steady. People had started feeling something odd. Children cried when near the altar. Dreams twisted into nightmares. Offerings returned double, and not everyone saw that as a blessing. During worship, a storm cloud formed directly above the church, unmoving. Pastor Elijah's voice cracked as he preached. His confidence was fraying. His smile forced. His hands trembled. And then it happened. An old woman in the front row screamed and collapsed. Her skin bubbled like boiling yam. She writhed, then went still. Gasps filled the room. The ushers carried her out. Elijah stood frozen. No declaration, no rebuke. For the first time in 10 years, he had no answer. Mama Titi returned with 5 elders. They brought oil, fire, salt, and prayer. Determined to cleanse the church, they locked the doors, stood in a circle, raised their hands. They called on heaven, but nothing came. The air thickened. Candles died. The oil turned black. The Bible pages curled and hissed. Then the flame they lit refused to catch on the altar. It flickered, then extinguished, as if something breathed it out. One elder fell to the ground, foaming. Another fled screaming. Mama Titi stood firm, her lips moving, her hands shaking, but deep inside she felt it. The house was no longer a house, it was a throne room, and its king was not holy. The next morning, 3 members of the church were found dead in their homes, mouths open, eyes hollow. On the church door, written in blood, were 3 words: "The debt grows." The town shook. Even the boldest pastors refused to comment. People packed their bags. They took their sick elsewhere. Crutches remained untouched. Babies cried near the church walls. And Pastor Elijah? He was never seen in public again. Elijah returned to the shrine, pale, broken, aged in spirit. He fell to his knees. "I give it all back," he cried. "The altar, the name, the crowds, take it. Let me go." But the voice from the tree laughed. It echoed through the clearing. "You cannot return what you never owned. You borrowed glory. Now repay it." Elijah wept. "What must I give?" he asked. And the tree replied, "A soul for a soul." That night, Mama Titi felt something watching her. She sat on her porch, clutching her Bible, humming hymns to herself. Then she saw him, Pastor Elijah, standing at the gate, eyes wild, knife in hand. He stepped forward, then froze. His hands shook, his face broke, the knife fell, and then he collapsed to his knees, screaming. "I can't," he cried into the dirt. "Not her, not her." Mama Titi walked slowly to him. She placed a hand on his head, not with judgment, but pity. "You built your altar with blood," she said softly, "but God can still take it down." But Elijah shook his head. "It's too late." At dawn, the townspeople saw smoke. Wellspring Fire Ministry was burning, but no other building caught fire. No wind carried embers, just the church, and it burned from the inside out. People gathered, crying, screaming, watching, but no one dared approach. Some swore they heard singing from within, not songs of joy, but of grief, of farewell. And some swore they saw a figure in white standing in the fire, arms open, smiling, but no body was found. Only ash, and the red box was gone. Months passed. Grass grew where the church once stood. Mama Titi started a small fellowship under the mango tree by her house. No microphones, no suits, just prayer, scripture, and truth. A handful gathered, not many, but enough. She often looked toward the hill where the church once stood, and she would whisper, "Let no man build altars where God did not call him." Years later, new churches rose across the land, some genuine, some gold-plated lies. But people remembered Wellspring. They spoke of the miracles and the curse, of the fire, of the voice from the tree. And in every whisper was a warning. Not every man who calls fire from heaven serves heaven. Sometimes on stormy nights, when the wind howls and the rain refuses to fall, people say the ground near the hill glows faintly red. And if you stand there long enough, you might hear a voice whispering through the earth. Was it ever enough? But no one answers. Because some questions echo long after the miracles fade, and some altars burn forever. And this comes to the end of Pastor Elijah, the man behind the altar. Thank you for watching till the end. For more interesting folk tales and stories like this, kindly like this video, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and do well to turn on the notifications bell so you can get notified whenever we post another new interesting folk tales or stories.